So we talk frequently about the fact that when teams are fundamentally aligned with core principles, results are rapid. This really means, can we drive high-performing teams?
Right.
All right. So real scenario, because if I'm my listeners, I want to hear meat and potatoes. So here's the scenario. Oren, we both recently had an opportunity to coach and mentor an individual who had high aspirations in a role, very positive, world was his oyster kind of a guy.
Right, almost too positive.
Too positive, as you would say. And the results were terrible.
Yeah.
Right. So we had the role to decide of whether to call it a day.
Yeah.
Or whether to give this individual an opportunity to about turn.
Right.
And I think one of the things we both fundamentally agree on is an individual can't impact or affect their performance unless they actually acknowledge or see the gap in their performance that needs to be worked on.
Right.
Would you agree?
No, totally. And for me, in this particular instance, it was a struggle. And I thought many nights about it, to be honest, because it's a person that comes across as so positive. And you want people to be positive.
Absolutely.
But it was to the point that I'm looking at this saying they're so positive. Are they actually seeing that there's issues? Because that can be, if everything's like, oh, this is great, this is great, this is great, then they're not owning up to their own stuff. And unless you own up to that, you can't move forward. And so it was a big concern for me is, could this person break through? Right. And I mean, kudos to you, because I think you sort of had that first discussion to open that door and to see that there is something to work with. And so you talk through the details of that. I can tell you from my side.
So here's how it went. So we had a task. We had an individual we thought had potential, but the performance wasn't happening. The business couldn't afford to keep supporting the scenario, and we had to rule in or rule out.
Right.
We believe fundamentally that if a person doesn't know what the gap is, they can't improve on it. So I sat down with the individual and had a very candid discussion on what wasn't working and gave examples so that the behavior could be identified and painted through very clearly the gap in a respectful way to make sure the individual's dignity and confidence was intact, to know that they had a choice to make.
Right.
The business needed certain performance and behaviors, but that may or may not have been aligned with his bedrock of what he wanted to do.
Right.
And so we set out saying, here's the picture. Could he see the gap? Is it what he wanted? And if it was, understanding what was expected.
Right.
And not because it was a personal desire, but it's what the business needed for us to continue.
Right.
And so that was a discussion, and out went the individual. And at that point, he had made the decision to own his circumstances, which set him up quite well, where he now was seeking guidance on how to maximize his opportunity. And that's where you come in.
Yeah, and so I wasn't sure, because we didn't really have a chance to debrief before. And I know, I mean, I've been in sessions where you've given feedback, and just so you know, Lara's firm but very fair, so she'll jump to the point and give you the feedback, like
you better be ready.
So you know you've had the feedback, and you know, in this case, we were expecting, there was a position to say, hey, we're going to trial you in this position, and if you're successful, then you get to keep it. If not, then right. So it was pretty direct. And so I believe, I wasn't there, but it was like, out of 10, say, if you hit a 10 out of 10, you're good. And in this case, the feedback was essentially you didn't hit a 10, maybe you hit a 5 or a 6. I don't know what number you gave it. And so I went into the scenario, and I started out saying, again, not knowing if this person was going to be open to the feedback, and if they were going to say, hey, it's all positive, I got a 5. That's really good. I didn't get the 10, but I got a 5. So I said, started out saying, okay, so how was your discussion? He said, no, it was great. It was really good to get the feedback. I'm like, okay. Said, but were you successful in what you set out to do? I said, were the goals clear when you took on the position? Were they clearly laid out? And he's like, yes. And I said, and so did you hit those goals? And he's like, no. I said, okay, so how did that make you feel? And he said, not good. I said, okay, great. Because
that's real.
That's real.
It's authentic.
And that gave me the window to start digging. And I said, okay, so why didn't it make you feel good? And then probing in, and I'm not going to get into all the details of it. It's not relevant for this point. But I delved in and sort of got him to admit that part of the over being positive was coming from a place of insecurity and projecting this mask. And that was great. That was great progress, because from there I was able to say, okay, that's awesome that you can recognize that, because if we look at that, let's just look at the impacts of that. So how you might be impacting people around you with that sort of thing. And so as he started to gain this awareness of saying, hey, my actions and taking on this role are impacting these people, and they're looking at me in a certain light, and that's not who I am. So he had that awareness. He owned it. He was vulnerable with me, and he owned it. And I mean, you can talk to that because it's just a great scenario.
Well, it is. Well, he was then receptive to actually acknowledging why he was behaving the way he was in terms of maybe making a situation more positive than it was. He owned the feedback and was ready to listen to guidance,
right,
and made some changes. And the flip part was then kind of the baton back in my court of holding him accountable, because if you've set performance expectations, you need to inspect what you expect. And I'm very pleased and very proud to present that he stepped up, has done exactly what was needed, which was to lead his team by example. And that's a discussion for another day, that as a leader on a team or as a high producer, unless you're out there doing every day what you expect of the team, you will never lead that team to top performance results. And he got that message, and so far so good. And that is really the very core foundational principles of high performance. Feedback, mentoring, accept the feedback, and get it done. And
no, absolutely. And a nice summary. And I'll just add, because for me, this is the cream on the top. And you were saying it, but I want to make sure that people understand this. Is you said don't expect of others what you're not doing yourself. And that goes as far as in this case, right, where owning to your stuff and being vulnerable is knowing that we as leaders, we don't have all the answers, and being vulnerable to that. And for me, my career and my learning curve really skyrocketed once I just accepted and sort of took off that mask and that I had to pretend that I know everything, moved beyond the imposter syndrome issue, right? And just recognize that I can learn from everybody, and I do learn from everybody I come in contact with. And I'm just like absorbing information and just fascinated by pretty much every person, from the 2-year-old to the 17-year-old to the 50-year-old to the 75-year-old. Like, there's just so many life lessons to be learned. Exactly. And we're in an environment today where there's so much rapid change, like blockchain and things that are happening that you have to. It's funny. There's 19, 20-year-olds that have so much to learn. And if you're closed-minded and you think this person's got nothing to teach me, you're hurting yourself. So I think that's just taking that mindset, and this example we talked about where he was open and recognized the delta. So us as leaders having to adopt that mindset as well, and being open to learn, and then you'll foster and encourage that.
Absolutely.